There,
Yep.
live. Look at that,
We're
Becky.
live.
There we are. That is so exciting. Hi, friends. So if you're tuning in on Twitter or on LinkedIn, eventually here in a moment, we're going to go live to Instagram. This is the book launch to Inquiry Mindset Questions Edition with my dear friend, Becky. Becky, I cannot thank you enough for facilitating this conversation with me today. I'd love for you to take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, some of your work, and some of our partnership and our friendship, just as I kind of toggle over and go live to Instagram. How does that sound, Beck?
Sounds perfect. Thanks, Trevor.
Great. Yeah.
So, hi, everyone. I know that we are on Trevor's social media, so it's really good to meet you all and say hi. Some of you will know me. I'm Becky Carlson. I run a learning community called Learning Pioneers, which focuses on what matters in education. And I would absolutely argue that everything Trevor works on and writes about matters in education, including being curious and asking questions. And I run another learning community called Press Play with Kim Scott. And Kim is going to be in the chat on LinkedIn, sharing links and looking up your comments. And that looks at taking play all throughout primary. So there's a lot of synergy between mine and Trevor's work. And we were super lucky to meet in person around this time last year. I'm going to say just over a year ago when the Chapters International Inquiry Conference was on in Vancouver, which was amazing. So if you get a chance to go to one of those, go. And then I was lucky enough to go to Trevor's classroom. So that's my intro. I don't know, Trevor, if you've managed to get your link live. And I think we need something on LinkedIn.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet. And do we need something on LinkedIn too? This is fun.
Yeah. Kim says she can't see it live yet on LinkedIn, so I'm just going to have a little look and see if I can see it.
Same. I'll do the same thing. And for those Twitter friends who are tuning in, thanks for your patience.
I can see you.
You can see me on LinkedIn? Good, yeah. Good. So that's a good thing.
So I think we're live on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, write in the comments and say hi. Here we go.
Let us know.
Here. Yay.
Let us know.
Marie Whiteley's here.
Yay.
So we are officially live.
That is great news. And we're trying to go live on Instagram. Marie. So let's see if this will work.
You can see it on LinkedIn. That's amazing.
There we go.
As you know, Marie, we're taking risks here and trying new things. So we're just trying to get it all figured out and lined up before we make sure everyone's here. And Cammie's here. Hey, Cammie. Great to see you. Thanks, Padma. Everyone's here. Hey, and Dohag, brilliant. I've been interacting with you a little bit on LinkedIn, so it's great to see you here. So everyone who's on LinkedIn, you're in the best place because you get to comment and join in. So we want your questions. We want your comments. I'll be picking up and seeing what's in the chat and sharing across from there. So do join in as we go. We definitely know we're live on LinkedIn, Trevor. So
yeah, and I know that we're live on Instagram too. Don't know about Twitter, but to be honest, let's just get started, Becky, can we? And let's just have fun with it. And we're going to have the recording, so those friends that can't tune in real time, we're going to blast out the recording, get it up on our spaces eventually. Becky, really, again, grateful, thankful. Going to explore this book today. You've got some questions for us to explore and kind of get going on. You want to kick it off for us?
Yeah, let's kick it off. I'm just seeing in the chat that Padma says the book is available in India. Yay!
Yay! That's fantastic. Yay!
So we were just saying it's available, we think, in Australia and the UK. Definitely is in the States and Canada. But I've got all of your books here, Trevor. Look, it's just missing the yellow one.
Oh my gosh, what a beautiful spread that is. And hopefully yellow is going to be right there in the next couple of days and look beautiful alongside those. That's kind of you. Very generous.
So yeah, let's dive in. So the first question really is why questioning and curiosity? So why they're next after your current suite?
Yeah. Well, a few things come to mind right away, Becky. Questioning and curiosity are synonymous with inquiry. But questioning has always been a little bit of a problem statement in terms of my work in my classroom, but also in the schools and classrooms in which I support around the world. Questioning has always seemed to be a bit of a tripping point for teachers. It's become something that, I hear things from colleagues around the world, things like, my students are too young, big questions, right? Or I get superficial questions. I don't get curricular questions. That's a big one I hear from teachers. Or, my students have questions, but I don't know what to do with them. I don't know how to bring them to the curriculum, or I don't know where to go to next in terms of exploring these questions. So if questioning and curiosity are synonymous with inquiry, but then there are these problem statements around how to engage in rich questioning techniques and protocols and routines with our students. That's been something I've really been focused on the last number of years in my work, forever in my practice as a teacher, but really honing and sharpening and creating question protocols and routines for my classroom and classrooms I support. So the problem statement is one piece. And then the curiosity piece, I know I've said this 1,000 times. So friends, if you've heard me share before, you've probably heard me share this research and this data. There are some amazing benefits to curiosity in the classroom. We've been surveying hundreds of kids over the last number of years, and the benefits to curiosity are so stark and so in our face that we just can't ignore planning for curiosity any longer in the classroom. The three benefits to curiosity, number one, when we have curious students, Becky, they do better in school. They get their grades, their performance is better, it's sharper, it increases. So we like that. Curiosity is aligned with academic performance, if you will. Benefit number two is attendance improves. Students attend more often and in a more timely manner. Teachers of the littles, this doesn't maybe matter as much for you. Teachers of the bigs at the high school level, students vote with their feet. And if the learning isn't relevant, if the learning isn't interesting, if the learning isn't contextually centered, students in schools are not coming to class. And so the antidote to that is curiosity. If we can plan for curiosity and not just hope for it, if we can plan for it, we'll see more students in our classrooms that are doing better in school. And then the third benefit to curiosity, when we ask kids how they feel about school, they say the most beautiful things. The littles tell us that school is fun. I love school. There's a sentiment of enjoyment from students kind of ages 5 to 10, if you will. Then when we get into the teenage years, the language shifts a little. Students tell us school is engaging. School is enjoyable. School is interesting. School is relevant. They see the point of school just because we plan for curiosity. So, those three benefits, they can't be ignored, Becky. I love that feeling of having students just like eating out of the palm of the hand, and the palm of the hand being curiosity. And conversely, the problem statement around how do we plan for questions, how do we engage in question routines so that our students' questions can kind of guide and lead us to next steps. So those are some thoughts there, Becky, as to why questioning and why curiosity.
Love it. Love all of that. And I saw you share a short video on LinkedIn about kind of the 3 whys behind curiosity. And as you shared them, like it hadn't quite rung, so I hadn't quite realized about the link with attendance and linking that with here in England, where so many kids don't want to go to school because they don't see the point. And it's like the response has been the opposite. It's like, well, let's punish them when they don't come. And it's like, no. How about we start with curiosity and then, start from there? So what if curiosity were front and center of our learning experience, the most important thing, and everything fueled from there? Then we'd have a totally different approach and system. So I didn't realize about those statistics behind it. I always kind of go with my own intuition, which is the children and how much they love school, and I want a classroom of kids, having mostly taught younger kids, early years, year 1, year 2. I want them to bounce through the door. I want them to be knocking the doors down saying, I want to be in here. And that's what curiosity does. It's that spark of curiosity and that link with agency. So maybe you could talk a little bit to the link with agency, because there were some really good points as we were sharing posts in the run up to this on LinkedIn about the link between curiosity and agency, and how agency is, I can't remember which way around, it was Job Christiansen who shared it. He said something like it was the prerequisite to curiosity, or you need to have agency in order to follow through with your curiosity. There's a link there. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful nudge. And if we can imagine agency as an umbrella, if we can imagine as this massive kind of learning umbrella, and underneath that umbrella, there are a family of skills that are nested underneath that umbrella. Curiosity as a disposition, it's nested underneath that umbrella, isn't it? There are a bunch of skills, and different colleagues call this family of skills different things, right, Becky? You know, our colleague Guy Claxton and yourself, we call these learning powers, don't we, Becky? Kath Murdoch calls these inquiry assets. Baina Kalik and Art Costa call these habits of mind. You know, underneath this umbrella are nested skills. We can't have students engage in rich and authentic inquiry and agency unless they're flexing that curious disposition. We can't have authentic inquiry if it's merely teacher-led and teacher-directed. You know, curiosity allows for more of a co-design and more of a partnership with our students. And question routines are the vehicle that brings that together now for me, and in this book and how I write about it and how I communicate it. Question routines allow us to bridge that gap between, you know, where we have to go, the curriculum. And I just want to be clear, I'm not waiting for curriculum to change and be rewritten for it to be more relevant, more interesting to teenagers and students, more contextually tied. I'm not waiting for curriculum to change. These question routines and engaging in rich provocation allow us to do both, allow us to, you know, explore the curriculum as well as engage in having students have more agency over learning through curiosity, for one point, Becky. You know, further to that, as students flex curiosity, some amazing things happen. You know, students are more resilient. They stick with a task longer. I hear from students all the time, I did homework for the first time in weeks, or I haven't stayed up that late doing my studies or my homework ever. And curiosity is the tipping point. It's the domino. So when I think of agency, I don't just think of, you know, this little kind of voice choice over a decision. It's this umbrella, and nested underneath the umbrella are a series of skills. Curiosity is one skill. It's a pivotal skill, not just for stick-with-itness, but also relevance, interest, importance, both to the learner as well as to the curriculum. So those things come to mind, Becky, that family of skills, and then also curiosity being the vehicle that allows us to explore more authentic inquiry together.
Yeah, love all of that. I've been thinking a bit about learning in terms of Venn diagrams. It's just a way of kind of organizing my thinking. And that, like, one of my dream Venn diagrams is play, inquiry, and the learning power approach. And then the power that comes from that. So then what do you get in the middle? And that could be many, many things, you know. But what you're sharing, and I guess the next question I wanted to ask was the link of this book with your previous books. And I'm already seeing that link between the kind of assessment and co-assessing of learning with curiosity, with perhaps something else, and in the middle is agency. You know, so how all those things fit together to create a powerful vehicle for learning. And one more point, when you were talking about not waiting for the new curriculum to come in and not waiting for someone to tell us what to do or to, you know, where we need to go, that's teacher agency. That's our own agency, you know, so we don't just sit here going, oh, well, it's all just doesn't really fit together and we don't know how to figure it out. We use curiosity as a fuel, and the ideas in your book. That's why I loved your latest book is the like Marie picked up, the protocols to develop that questioning and curiosity. So it's front and center and integrated into everything you do. So,
yeah, lovely.
So yeah. What links do you see between your book so far and then the question and curiosity one as the next in the suite?
Yeah. Well, I love that Venn diagram analogy, and I suppose, you know, I'd love to squish the Venn diagram together to have all those spheres kind of align beautifully. But the reality of our teaching practice is that there are push and pull factors that are going to try to yank those spheres further apart. And you referenced teacher agency, Becky. I think that's part of our responsibility. That's part of the beauty of our profession, is we have some choice in bringing those elements together and, you know, following our intuition. Yes, but also realizing that there are push and pull factors in our practice that are going to yank us away from some of these things that we really value. And our role, our responsibility, the gift in education is we are trying our best to bring that Venn diagram more beautifully aligned and symmetrical, aren't we? So I love that analogy. And I often think about that. How can I do more of this every day, every moment, if you will, with my students? I appreciate the connection to my green book, my assessment book. I tell you, this book, it's formative assessment and action, and action being a really important word to raise up. All of the question routines call on teachers to facilitate learning in a physical way. You know, students are up out of their seats. They're mapping out questions within structures, whether it's on chart paper, whether it's virtually, whether it's on your whiteboard, whether it's with sticky notes or white erase markers. But the learning is happening before our eyes. That's a beautiful thing for us to consider, and a beautiful thing for us to embrace is as the evidence of learning is occurring, as it's surfacing before our eyes, it's formative assessment and action. It's what are these questions telling us? Where are our students now? Where do we need to go to next? What are our next steps in getting there? So that timeliness is so important for us to consider with regards to assessment practice. The greater the window of time between learning and assessing, and feedback specifically, the less likely it is to impact the learner and shape their growth. So the larger the window of time, the less likely it is to have purpose, to work, to stick. If we can shrink that window of time, i.e., have it be real time, in the moment, happening before us, it's more likely, most likely, to stick for our students. Bringing our thinking to the surface, you know, voicing our reflections, assessing with students aside them, rather than something that I do in isolation without my scholars. The routines allow us to assess in real time with our scholars. A keyword phrase in Inquiry Mindset Assessment Edition is assessment capable kids. You know, that was a big goal of mine in writing that publication, was how do we sharpen the assessment skills of our students so they can assess with accuracy and clarity and become more competent self-assessors, if you will. Well, there's a very similar objective with questions edition, which is I want students to become more question competent. I want them to understand the role that questions play in their learning, in shaping their learning. And gosh, that's very much aligned with and aside to assessment capable kids. So, you know, the fourth book couldn't have happened without the first book. It couldn't have happened without the second book. It certainly couldn't have happened humbly with without the third book. You don't need to read these all in sequence and order, but there are certainly connections. And for me, the richest connection between assessment edition and questions edition is its evidence of learning in real time. And that gives us the greatest opportunity to provide powerful feedback and support of our learners, for our learners, excuse me, as learning is happening, Becky.
Yes to all of that. You know, and what that makes me think of is the usefulness of your book for a classroom practitioner, because then you know that you are building curiosity and questioning with conscious competence. You know, you're consciously, you know that you're having that impact. But for leadership, for their whole team to be focusing on that, that's going to help progress and help support every single student. And by coaching students in the moment in the way that you're describing, they learn to do that independently. So they'll start to do that by themselves, and they'll start to take that home, and they'll start to do that in their lives moving forwards, which again, thinking about the kind of, Guy Claxton talks about the residue of learning from school. What are they going to take from school that's useful now in our present lives and later on? And that will produce a residue of learning where you're able to self-assess, which is invaluable. You know, who doesn't want that?
No, that transfer is the thing, right? Transfer to a different context, outside of schooling, outside of classrooms, outside of subject areas. Are they flexing certain skills that they can apply in any setting, in any context? I love that residue of learning. That is beautiful. That is beautiful.
Guy's good with words. He's always coming up with new things, isn't he?
A wizard.
Yeah, we have some great questions in the chat. So Alka's asked, can we call curiosity a trait or a skill?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah. Well, Becky, I'm going to ask you to go first. What do you think?
Well, as you were describing before, habits of mind, I would call it a learning
Hmm.
habit. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a trait or a skill, because a trait speaks to kind of personality. So that
Yeah.
kind of feels like it's something innate. A skill is something you kind of, I don't know, refine over time. Although I don't know what the difference between a skill and a habit that is. But a habit is something that you build and you can refine and get better at. So
Yeah.
I would describe it as like Art Costa does, a habit of mind or a learning habit, or Guy calls them learning muscles.
Yeah.
And the idea of learning muscles is that you can get ever more curious. So I love that there was that clip from Valerie Hannon, who we interviewed in Learning Pioneers, where she said that children should leave early years with undamaged curiosity. Well, actually, we should leave school with undamaged curiosity. And even better, we should be ever more curious. We should be as we go. So that's how I'd frame it. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I was just on holiday in this beautiful beach community here on Vancouver Island, and we holidayed with some good friends of ours, and they have two children, twins, just leaving kindergarten, entering grade one next year. So ages 5, 6 in that realm. And I think of this story because all kids are curious. All kids have questions. And it's about a 4-hour drive to where we were vacationing. And in the back seat was mom with the twins between the two car seats for 4 hours. And I asked mom, I said, Mom, how many questions did they ask for the 4 hours? And she said, Trevor, it was nonstop. Like finally, when they had a nap for 15 minutes, it was like, oh, I could breathe a sigh. I could sleep from exploring all their questions together. And I said to the mom, I said, that is the work, listening to their questions, honoring their curiosities. When they look out the window and they're making meaning and figuring out story, and they want to know something and they have a question, like engage, lean in, unfold. That is the work. And yes, it's exhausting, but gosh, think about what schooling does to a child's curiosity. Think about how we school the curiosity out of our students. Think about the pivotal role we have in nurturing and honing and sharpening a child's curiosity. Like, what a gift, what a great responsibility that is. And so I think of that piece first and foremost, Becky. Like, and I think we've all been stuck with kids who have 1,000 questions, and gosh, when are they going to stop? Friends, that is the work. That is the beauty of growing and making connections and making meaning of the world around us. So, further to that, Becky, I think when we talk about curiosity as a muscle, oh, I love, again, Guy, what a wizard with words, right? When we talk about it as a muscle, I think question routines allow students to flex that muscle, allow students to become more curious in the schooling setting. Question routines are where we can exercise that muscle a little bit more often. And for teachers, in a little bit of a way that we can see how questions lead to next steps. It's not this tangent, although tangents are beautiful. It's not this aside, although asides are beautiful. It's this really planned pathway where we're bringing student curiosity and the curriculum together. We're kind of weaving that thread to guide our next steps. Yeah, and last, when I think about that question from the chat, gosh, it's amazing how one question gets us going. I think of almost a campfire analogy, Becky, where curiosity is like a campfire. When one person is curious, other people just want to kind of get around that curiosity. The research tells us this is the case. Curiosity is infectious. Curiosity impacts those who are around someone that is curious. For too long, I think teachers have been hopeful that students are coming into classroom curious, because we know how powerful that is. When a student is curious about something, oh my gosh, we could just work with that. We can just squeeze that one dry, can't we? But if we're planning for curiosity and we're using question routines, this campfire is going to grow. This campfire is going to get stronger. This campfire is going to gather more students around it. And so this notion of curiosity being a muscle, yes, and also this attraction to curiosity, how one person's curiosity impacts other people's curiosity. I think that's something that, gosh, the research around curiosity right now, that wasn't around 10, 15, 20 years ago, is so helpful for teachers to see the impact benefit of exploring curiosity with their students. It's so much more than having students want to be at school. attend school, stick with school. It's also, curiosity is just so darn powerful when it comes to collaboration, communication, and community, isn't it?
Yeah. So when kids are super curious and everyone around them is curious, you can't stop them from learning. It's like it's impossible to dampen that because they're so excited. Yeah, and I love that idea of the ripple effect. It was making me think a little bit of when I was teaching in Bangkok in lockdown, and so obviously at that time everyone had to pivot and do things completely differently. And I think I was working in Bangkok Patana, which I know you visited on your, recently on the Chapters International Conference. But I think our early years team did an incredible job. We had just incredible practitioners and a really skilled team. And we ended up with this kind of lovely inquiry-led online program with our students. And one of the weeks we were looking at learning outside. Kath Murdoch had done a series of inquiry learning outside in lockdown. And we took the parents on a journey with us. So I'm just going to link this to Samantha's question. I'm going to come back to that because it's a really good one about supporting families to be part of this, and perhaps colleagues around you who aren't so bought into this idea. But this is what we did with parents. We walked alongside them. So everything we were setting as an inquiry, we created a video just for parents saying, this is the pedagogy behind it, and this is how you can support the learning. So at the beginning of the week, the idea was for them to go out and just ask questions, just be curious about nature. And the challenge for parents was to not answer one single question for the whole week. Just fuel their curiosity, just gather questions and say, oh, that's fascinating. I wonder what, and wonder with them. And that was really, really powerful. And then we got to the investigating and how you'd then go and find out and choose which question. But that meant we walked the journey with parents. And it's really hard not to go, oh, well, I'll tell you why that is. And then you kind of have dampened the curiosity, So I love that idea of it having a ripple effect. Could we segue into looking at your book and exploring some of the protocols in your book? So
yeah, absolutely.
So I was wondering from your book, if you picked one protocol, because I know you've got loads in there, that would deeply impact on anybody's practice, which one would you pick? That's going to be hard.
Yeah, it is hard. However, I suppose I'll start with the start of the book. A foundational move for question routines is, my friends, it's to co-design indicators of closed and open questions. This is a critical move we need to make with our learners. And trust me, your learners know. We just did this with grade 1 students, 5, 6 years old. And the team of teachers, they were a little bit like, oh, I don't think my students know what a closed-ended question is. And I said, let's ask. Let's ask them and listen to what they come up with, listen to the connection. And gosh, these little students came up with beautiful indicators for both closed and open questions. What we do is, when we co-design those indicators, we can refer to them with each question routine we engage in. So there's a chapter alone on co-designing indicators for closed and open. I say closed and open. We can come up with any sister words for closed and open. We can say shallow and deep. We can say Googleable and ungoogleable. High school kids love that one. So that would be a foundational move before we even unpack the questioning routines, is co-design those indicators with our students, make them visible in the classroom. So chart paper up on the classroom so that we can revisit the chart paper for closed and open ongoingly. And what we're going to look at, those indicators across time, is how competent are our students becoming in using this language, making connections, justifying their understanding of the questions that they're crafting and generating, in terms of where do they fall on the spectrum of closed to open. So that's foundational. I wanted to share that little morsel from the book. But I suppose if I had to pick one question routine, I would focus on the question triangle, partly because it's just a really easy one for us to imagine here in the StreamYard in the live broadcast today. The question triangle, my friends, it's an inverted triangle, if you can imagine an inverted triangle. And within the inverted triangle, there are 3 bands. From top to bottom, it's going to be closed at the top, a little bit more open in the middle, and most open at the bottom. So close, a little bit more open, and open at the bottom. And students are going to place their questions in those 3 bands. They're all going to stand, and we've done the question triangle in small groups of 3 or 4 or 5 at little pods throughout the room. We've done the question triangle in one physical space at the front of the room on the whiteboard or chart paper, ideally, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But students, as they bring their questions up and they place them in the question triangle in one of those 3 bands, we're going to call on them to justify their placement using the indicators for close and open. If a student places it in the middle band, we're going to call on them to look at those indicators and tell us about their placement. Tell us about the why underneath that placement. Justify their thinking and their placement of that question. Gosh, first and foremost, let's just make a connection to assessment right now. What do their questions tell us? Where do their questions nudge us to go to next? That's formative assessment in real time. It's also real-time differentiation. As students are walking up to the question routine and they're placing these questions within the triangle, we have an opportunity to target an intervention with our students that is timely, that is much more personalized than if I'm trying to differentiate for the whole group. When students are coming up and I see the learning in action, my differentiation, my intervention is much more successfully received because it's much more personalized in its targeting. So the assessment connection, I just wanted to make ever so briefly, when we see the learning in the routine, our differentiation is really, really sharp. I just shared, one little pivotal moment there. I said, I'd love for these routines to be done on chart paper if possible. And the triangle, once populated and done on chart paper, there's a beautiful move we can make. And for those watching, I'm going to draw an inverted triangle here in my notebook, just so we can see what we're talking about. Gosh, this is a messy inverted triangle. So I've got my inverted triangle. I've got my 3 bands. I'm going to go up to the chart paper. Once it's all populated, once I've really exhausted that justification of placement with students, and I'm going to pull the chart paper off the wall and I'm going to twist it 90 degrees. And now what we have, friends, is the triangle has become an arrow. Do you see how it's an arrow kind of directing the process of the inquiry, the order of the inquiry, if you will? Students now see that their close-ended questions are going to lead to the open. There's a direction to our inquiry. Almost, if you will, it could be said a chronological approach or an opportunity to spiral back. Some of these questions will take us to the deep end of the triangle and then we can come back. That move of pivoting the triangle 90 degrees, every time we do that with students, there's this aha moment in the class where they say, I get it. They can actually see how their questions are leading to next steps. I also love the triangle because there's less gradient in the spread of close and open questions. As you can see, there are only 3 bands for students to place their questions into. It's kind of a really safe, competence building start to routines because, of course, they're placing their questions into those 3 bands. Becky, we packed a lot into that question. There's a whole chapter on that triangle alone, but what I wanted to start with is the foundational move that we all need to engage in, which was co-designing indicators for close and open. And that co-designing experience is actually going to lead our students into the rest of the routines in a beautiful way, because the routines, in essence, are calling on students to co-design the learning with the teacher facilitating that process using the routines as a little bit of the vehicle, Becky, if you will.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for explaining that so clearly. If Guy's a wizard of words, you're a wizard of models and sketch notes and making those ideas clear. And that when I listen to you share those ideas, I just think I just want to be straight back in the classroom and trying those, because I can just imagine the impact on what I was really thinking about when you were sharing that actually was I think all children and adults just want to feel seen, heard, and valued. And with a protocol like that and all the others in your book, that that's just one of many, they're going to feel valued because that's their idea up there front and center and being used to drive the learning, not being ignored, not being forgotten. It's there. And if some other questions are used as the driver, it's like you said, you can spiral back and it's there and it's visible. So yeah, I just love that. And I love the nifty idea of turning it around to an arrow.
Yeah, a lot of fun, playful, but also we need to see how questions are taking us to a certain place, and the depth of open-ended questions can feel overwhelming for students. Something fascinating to consider is we ask students, what do you think you'll feel when you explore and answer close-ended questions? What feelings may surface? And kids say the darndest things. Kids love close-ended questions. There's a clear answer. There's a yes, no. I know I'm going to find something that is definitive. I know I'm going to feel good at the end of this exploration. I'm going to feel like it was a success. And then we ask them, well, what feelings do you anticipate may bubble up when you explore open-ended questions? Students say the darndest things. I don't like open-ended questions because there's an uncertainty. There's not a one answer. I don't know what I'll find out through exploring these open-ended questions. And that's a beautiful reflection for students to consider. The feelings that are going to surface as we engage in inquiry. By mapping out the inquiry using the triangle into the arrow, there's more clarity for our students. We want to avoid having them feel overwhelmed or anxious or stressed or overly nervous. We want to present these conditions and these feelings in really safe, inclusive, and facilitated ways. And a routine like the triangle and then shaping the direction of the inquiry when we pivot it allows students to see that, okay, there's a bit of a plan here. I could see how, although I don't have a clear answer yet, I could see how exploring these questions is going to be a little bit more clear for me in getting to open-ended questions where I may feel a little bit anxious or overwhelmed or uncertain. So talking about feelings is actually a move that we make in the co-designing of indicators of close and open. We weave those questions in so we can add some of those feelings to our anchor charts and just have students be a little bit more present and embodied and in their learning as we're exploring their questions in these routines, Becky.
I love that about linking emotions in, because I guess we don't talk about that. It's just, so we're not given that in our curriculum, are we? They don't say, and talk about the emotions associated with this, but it's so important for learning, and so important for like a psychologically safe classroom where you're saying, actually, I'm feeling a bit uncertain about this. I feel a bit wobbly, and for that to be absolutely okay, because there'll be 10 other people who are feeling like that. And the other thing I wanted to link that in with was the uncertainty, because that's the whole point, isn't it? We want to feel uncertain because life isn't certain. So we need those kind of open-ended questions where we don't really know where we're going to go and what we're going to find out, to get used to feeling uncertain and going through a kind of wobble and a grapple. And that makes it more exciting to teach because you don't know what you're going to find out. The number of times that kids have asked questions and I've been like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. You're finding these things out for me. This is amazing. And you're walking that journey together. I think it's Sugata Mitra who said, we interviewed Sugata Mitra in Learning Pioneers. Do you know his work?
Yes, I do. And I was so excited that you interviewed him. Give me some of that. I want access to that content, Becky. Okay. But yeah, continue. Tell us about that interview.
He's just this brilliant out-of-the-box thinker. And one thing he was sharing was, why is all of our curriculum and everything we do like certain? Like, it's like, you need to learn this stuff, or this is how it's going to be. Why aren't we exploring new things we don't even know with the children? And that's what focusing on questions as a driver for learning does. You will find out things that as an adult you already know, but you also find out things or a new perspective or an angle you'd never thought of before, which makes us all more open-minded. More could be and less is, in Guy's words. I think that comes from Ellen Langer, actually. Could be in his language. But
what a beautiful place for us to explore uncertainties in the safety and under the support of a professional, in the safety and the support of a school where students spend 7, 8, 9 hours of their day. The growing mind is craving agency, risk-taking, and kind of stretching the boundaries, bumping their elbows against the parameters. And what a great place for us to do that with question routines and in a schooling setting. What's the worst that can happen under a teacher's care where we're exploring these questions? This is the place to do it. Where we don't want them doing it is out there after school. We know what happens when students are bumping the parameters and trying to, break things. We want that risk taking to happen in school under the professional care of a teacher. And question routines really help bridge that gap. Again, the problem statement was my students are too young, or questions don't take us to a place. The routines are meant to bridge that gap so we can begin to tighten that Venn diagram again, if you will, Becky.
Yeah. And it's the tightening and the clarity. Just thinking about that, everything you're sharing in that book. I don't think there are many educators that would say they don't want to cultivate curiosity, but the how you
Exactly.
go about it can feel a bit mysterious, or you can have a few little things that you're kind of doing and that makes a difference, but how can we really consciously and purposefully amplify that? And that's what your book's providing. It's providing the protocols to be able to do that consciously. So what you're describing there is basically 2 chapters of the book. And there 10 ideas in there?
Yeah, well, there are 10 routines, 10 routines. It's almost a 400-page offering. It's my largest offering. And part of what's made it really large, Becky, is we've invited teachers who have been using these routines for a number of months, a number of years. We've gifted the routines to several partner schools where we just train teachers to use these routines across the K-12 setting. And teachers have been coming back with the most interesting data. And when we see this data, we've invited teachers to write little contributions, little vignettes to each routine. So the 3 questions we ask teachers to reflect on in these vignettes are, just tell us what you did. Tell us your process. What routine did you use and what did you do? Then what did you notice? What did you observe? What did you see with your students? And then thirdly, what advice do you have with someone who wants to get going with this routine or is in a similar context or even subject area to you? And so these vignettes, every routine has a little handful of vignettes, and those have created a little bit more of a robust offering in terms of page count, but also a robust offering in terms of the quality of communicating how to implement these routines in classroom context. I'm in the classroom at the high school setting. I teach at the schools that I go and I work with and work in, but to have teachers who are engaged in this work, who have been engaged in using question routines, contribute these little vignettes. They're really playful. They're really helpful. And it's this little lens on the routine in a classroom in the schools that I support around the world. So that's a little bit of why the book is so large. There are 10 routines. Each one has a little handful of vignettes attached to them, Becky.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. I wanted to mention that because that's why I love the setup of the chapters, the kind of understanding why, the clear explanation of what it was, and then an example brought to life that you can see, oh my goodness, that made such an impact. And I love those questions. Can you remind me what they were again? That you were
So it was what did you do? Like, just walk us through your process. How, walk us through your steps. Number 2 was, what did you notice about your students? What did you notice about yourself? What did you notice broadly? And number 3, what advice do you have for teachers who are going to engage in these routines in their own practice? And the advice little bits are just yummy little morsels. They're so nourishing to kind of iron out the creases or learn from someone else. I got to share one noticing and one piece of advice. It was from a colleague at a school in Manila. ISM, love you all. Mike, if you're watching, really appreciate you, Mike. Mike's little vignette, Mike Kramer, he shared that the first time he used a particular routine with his high school classroom, his high school students, they were a little bit reticent. They were a little bit uncertain. They were a little bit wanting the worksheet. Kind of this sentiment of, why am I being asked to do this? Like, just give me the task, give me the assignment already. And Mike caught himself. Mike kind of put his hands in his pockets and said to himself, I'm not going to save them. I'm going to engage in the routine and we're going to stick with it. And I'm going to help them see how these questions are actually leading to creating an assignment or creating a worksheet or creating a task that is co-designed, that is done together. And in doing so, they're going to see that there are certain skills that they're flexing that they can't flex if I just gave them the darn worksheet. And Mike beautifully communicates his noticing, his feeling of like, oh no, am I doing it wrong? Like, they're not engaged. Trevor said they were going to be engaged. What's going wrong here? And then catching himself and saying, wait a second, they want the low-hanging fruit. They want the easy out. And I'm not going to let that happen because I'm committed to certain values and certain processes that have different returns on investment than if I were to simply give them the task. These little morsels, these little vignettes, these contributions, they shed light on some of the most beautiful reflections from teachers, where they realize in the moment the real-time data is telling them something, and it's allowing them to make these really mindful moves, whether they're verbalizing those moves with their students or they're realizing them themselves. Oh my gosh, we're going places that I didn't think we'd go to together so fast, so soon, so powerfully, Becky.
I love that example. And I'm going to bring it back to one of Guy's things again, the guts of learning. That's the guts of learning of a teacher who's taking risks in their practice. Like, you kind of hope it's going to go really amazingly, and sometimes it's not quite how you imagined it was going to be. But I love the way you described that teacher. Was it Mike?
Mike Kramer.
Sticking with, his belief in the students and understanding of the kind of learners he's wanting to develop. And that speaks a little bit to Samantha's question earlier on about where there's resistance, how do you kind of push through that? And that belief in the learning and the ideas that are going to come from that. But I'm sure, like, people have used thinking routines in their classrooms. The thinking that comes from that, the things that students say that you'd have never have got from them otherwise, make them so worthwhile, apart from structuring an entire inquiry and everything else brilliant that comes from it. But that perspective and thinking that the students didn't even realize was in themselves either, that comes out with young students as well. And I love that. Again, another Guy thing. Guy talks about having like thought bubbles above our heads. And one of them, he says, should be, what's the least amount I can do to get this child back on track? And that's that kind of push. It's like, I'm going to stick with this because I know it's going to be best for our learning in the long run. I'm not going to just give up on this because that would be the easiest thing. I'm going to push through because there's going to be great things that come from this. So I love that. Okay, next question. So you described a little bit about some of the protocols in your new book. And, that's just so rich, like 1/10 of what's in there already, how much learning you can get from that. But if a leader of a school or a classroom practitioner applied just 50% of what was in your book, how can you imagine their learning in their classroom might look like?
Ooh, it's hard to answer that one humbly, Becky. Honestly, it's a powerful question, and I'll be playful and I'll blush, but honestly, transformational. I think of how these routines are so inclusive and inviting to all scholars. I was at a school that I work with in Tokyo, and I walked into the room, Becky, and there was this one young man, God bless him, such a fantastic, smart, intelligent boy. And you could just see that he was not into school. You could just see, he had his shoes off, for example, he was yawning, he was staring out the window, and you could see the teacher was doing her best. God bless you, Grace. I love you. Grace was doing her best, and the student was not engaging in anything we were serving up. And the moment we engage in taking the learning vertical, the moment we engage in inviting the students to stand and get to a vertical surface and begin mapping out ideas and sharing their thinking and communicating, everything changed for this young man. He was leaning into the wall. This is a beautiful move that I witnessed him do. He had his palm up against the wall and he was pressing into it. It was almost like he was trying to push the wall over, but he wasn't. What was he doing? He was self-regulating. In being able to stand and finding himself in his own body, he was all of a sudden charged. He was alive. He wasn't yawning. He wasn't distracted. He was in the learning in a very different way. He was able to share ideas with his peers in a way in which wasn't done in isolation at his desk, in his binder, in his workbook. It was done as a togetherness, where we're weaving this community of learning fabric more tightly together. So the inclusive piece is so important to me. I don't want students checking out of school. I don't want them, when they vote with their feet, going the other way. I want them in school and developing certain skills, which is, I think, that transferable piece that we were talking about earlier, Becky. If I think of if teachers adopted 50% of the ideas in this book, what could happen? Transformational, in part because of the skills students are developing that transfer to any context. They can use these in sport. They can use these in relationship. They can use these in, hobbies and interests and passions and in workplaces and in future steps. That skill development is so necessary, as well as something that just bubbles up with each particular routine. And then I just think about more authentic inquiry. I think about if teachers engage in routines such as what I propose in the publication, there's more of an authentic co-design that's happening. There's more of this, what questions are surfacing towards the curriculum? How can I weave these in to kind of plan and guide and shape our next steps? Moving away from a teacher-directed inquiry, more towards an authentic, guided, co-designed inquiry, that can be a hard move for teachers to make. And sometimes we go too fast, too soon towards the deep end of the inquiry pool, if you will. Question routines allow that to be just a really intentional transition from teacher-led inquiry to this co-designed inquiry space. Those are three things that come to mind for me, Becky, in terms of 50% of the book being read, what kind of an impact could it have? We've also talked about embodied learning ever so briefly, this notion of students being in their body. Guy says our students just aren't a brain on two sticks. There's heart, lungs, organ, there's feelings involved. And questions allow us to begin to kind of see what that could look like and see the possibility and potential in getting our students in their body and on their feet and working together in beautiful collaborative ways, if you will.
Yeah, transformational. And it's that we talk in learning
humbly transformational. Humbly.
That's just 50%. What if we did 100%? We talk about going from inspiration to perspiration. So it's that you can't just read the book, you've got to start to put the ideas into action. And Carla's put in the chat, I love the fact that this book is good for all levels, perfect for a school-wide book study. Yes, isn't that a brilliant way to bring a team together, to strategize together, and to have teacher agency as well? You could read that book and say, right, which protocol are you going to try out first? And you get that like agency within a framework. We're all going to get better at developing student questioning, curiosity. There's a bunch of stuff to choose from here. Which one are you going to go first and why? And that's actually what I wanted to say as well about the questions that you were asking for your vignettes. I thought they were such great questions for a whole school learning study. So again, something we're really interested in Learning Pioneers is going from kind of a malaligned approach where some people are, developing great practice, but in silos, to this connected one where we're all developing and moving towards something, a shared vision together. And the questions you were asking, I was just thinking that would just be so rich for a whole school study using your book as well. You could use your book as a book study and have those questions and people gathering their own vignettes using those questions. And then you could put them up on the school wall, using some of Jessica Vance's fantastic stuff around documenting teacher learning. And that could become a whole school learning study. And then you have impact. That's collective efficacy.
Well, Becky, that's exactly how the question surfaced, was those few schools that we gave the entire family of routines to. There were about a dozen of them. We wanted to get some data, and it wasn't the vignettes. We wanted to get teachers turning and talking to one another at staff meetings. And so we gave them those three questions. Every month, teachers were implementing a variety of question routines. And then at every staff meeting, there was a turn and talk. There was a give one, get one. There was a table rotation. There was a jigsaw. There was something collaboratively designed for them to share out what they noticed, what they did, what they noticed, and what advice they have to give other people in the room. And gosh, the question competence of the teachers at these schools that were engaging in this reflective practice, this collaboratively sharing out and engaging in a practice in their classroom to come out to teachers and share their learning. The question competence of the staff was increasing month to month. Imagine the question competence we saw in classrooms with students, as students engage in this rich question routine experience that they had in classrooms due to the rich community of practice that teachers were engaged in. So those three questions were kind of a book study, if you will, before the book was as it is now. They were given the routines, and then those were the three questions we wanted teachers to think about, prepare for when it came time to sharing out at staff meetings.
Yeah, love that. And it values making mistakes as a teacher, which is something we so rarely do visibly. And actually, I don't know whether this is a worldwide thing, but for sure in England, we've been judged as teachers, and you kind of are encouraged then to have like perfect lessons and not invite people into your classroom, and it doesn't speak to collaboration. So this is a way of breaking up and making things more collaborative. And it makes me think of James Nottingham. Did James write the foreword for your book?
He sure did. God
Yeah.
bless James. Thank you, James, if you're watching. Yeah, fantastic colleague, educator. Yeah.
You know, I've been thinking of him a lot whilst you've been sharing answers, because a lot of his work and research speaks to the things that you're sharing, and he links very much with John Hattie's research and kind of questioning and conversation. And but what was I going to say about James? It's gone out of my head now. What were we talking about just before that?
We were talking about teachers being a little bit hesitant to make mistakes
Yes.
and creating that safety.
So when we interviewed him about developing challenge, and he was saying, how often do you kind of go into the staff room and say, hey, I just taught this brilliant lesson and all these great things happened, but he's like, but how often do you go in and say, do you know what, I just really stuffed up, I just really messed that up? And that invitation to give advice forward, it's like paying it forward to other teachers. It's like, so we did this, but this is where we made the mistakes, so when you try it out, try and see if you can miss those. And it has this beautiful, inviting way of just being open about that process of learning. So I love that. That then changes whole staff culture as well.
It is. And you know, it's so interesting what you referenced with James. There's exactly what we want for students. We want students to find failure and reflect and learn from mistakes. And if we want those experiences and that rich learning for students, we need the same for teachers. We need leaders who are providing those safe conditions to take risks and bump up against failure and say when we stuffed up and move forward, you know, what are our next steps? And so modeling the model is really important in this work. If we want these things for teachers, the skills, the dispositions, the curiosity, the questions, teachers need to be kind of playing in a similar sandbox as a school community.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, I always think of it through 3 levels. Like, how are you showing up like that for yourself? How is leadership modeling that? And how are we doing it within the classroom? You know, because if we don't have all 3, we're putting the brakes on learning. You know, if that's just happening in the classroom, but you're not modeling your own curiosity and that's not really visible, then the kids don't know that you're curious too. And if leadership aren't modeling that with their teams, doesn't feel like it's really truly valued. So it's got to be all 3 levels.
Yeah. And, you know, we spoke earlier about how students feel. Well, let's talk about how teachers feel. When there's alignment there across all those layers that you're referring to, Becky, when there's alignment, teachers feel invigorated. Teachers feel excited to walk into that building where there's that kind of alignment, where they see leaders who value the same protocols, who see leaders who are sharpening and honing curiosity, for example. Like, that trickle down from that alignment is huge. If there's misalignment, teachers feel like they're swimming upstream. Teachers feel like it's an uphill battle, or teachers feel isolated and siloed and disconnected from, in part, that misalignment. So we spoke about student feelings earlier. Teacher feelings are really important, and leaders have a huge hand in creating that alignment. So teacher agency, teacher efficacy, teacher excitement for being in the practice is surfacing, it's bubbling up. Again, there's that campfire analogy as well that we can play with. That alignment has a huge impact on classroom practice and also teachers' feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. So if we transfer what I was saying before about feeling seen, heard, and valued, that's the same for us as adults. Teachers want to and need to feel like that, and leadership team. You know, I often talk about in Learning Pioneers how much we're feeding back to leadership, because that can feel super, super lonely, you know, and both the kind of things that are going really well and are landing really well, but also having the courage to be able to say, you know, this thing that we're doing isn't quite working for everyone. Can we find a way of changing it? Because otherwise people start gossiping, and then that starts a toxic culture. So we're all kind of responsible for creating that curious, excited learning culture, you know, together.
Yes. All caps. Yes, yeah. We all are. Yeah.
So that leads perfectly to the next question, because I was going to ask if leadership read your book and used the protocols, applied them to leadership strategy and to their whole school learning, as well as it being used in classroom practice. How do you manage that? Imagine that. Do you think that could be like a thing? Leadership could get
Yeah.
your book and use the protocols too?
Absolutely. And it is a thing. The schools, those dozen schools or so that adopted the routines, that was part of the coaching. That was part of the partnership, was leaders had to be using the routines in staff meetings, in committee meetings, meeting with teams. And when I say leadership, coordinators and coaches and instructional leaders, department heads, they're using these routines. The routines are just, they're in our toolkit, if you will. And that alignment again is important. We often say we want to model the model. We want to model the model. These routines need to be modeled. They need to be experienced. Teachers are more willing to give physical space in their classroom with their students standing and walking, because that can feel a little bit uncertain, right? Like inviting students out of their seats to come up to a space and what's going to happen here, the uncertainty. Teachers are more willing to trust that process if they've experienced that process and seen that the outcome was rewarding, the outcome was fruitful. So a lot of schools have been using these routines in that leadership layer. And I broadly speaking, leadership to me means any teacher, educator, stakeholder who's invested in school growth and school change. We have teacher leaders who are in the classroom who are invested in school growth and school shifts, school change. So if you define yourself as a leader, these routines are for you. And again, there's more likelihood routines are going to land in the classroom if teachers themselves have experienced the reward, the fruits, the outcomes of the routines being facilitated by someone else for them and with them, if you will, Becky.
Yeah, and that can come from leadership. Wonderful if it comes from leadership. It could, but we're all leaders, no matter where we're sitting within a school system or a community, we're all leading from our seat. So the way I would do that, if I were in a school and I wanted to read your book as a book study, is I would take that forward and I'd say, hey, can I create a book study group for this book, which I've done previously? And schools love that because you're leading the learning. It's great. It's win-win-win. It's win for the school because you're bringing the learning forward. It's win for every single person who joins that book study because you're all going to shape your practice. It's win for you, especially if you feel a bit alone in your school. Suddenly you've got a community of people who are developing those ideas with you. So you can take that. That's your own agency. You can take that step and say, I don't care if leadership aren't asking me to do this. Yeah. I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to invite everybody in. And then that kind of ripple effect spreads as well. And then kind of ask leadership for time to share that reflection, ask leadership for space in the walls in the school to share your learning as you go, and then the ripple effect kind of continues like that. So don't wait for leadership to
no. And with all of my previous books, there was an adjacent book club resource. You could download it from my website and it guides a facilitator through bringing colleagues together to talk about their reading, to talk about their implementation. With this particular book, the questions and the reflections, they're baked into the design of the book. So every chapter has these discussion questions right at the end. There are a series of QR codes that take you to downloadables. So there's no adjacent book club resource. It's right there in the book. So as you're reading it and you're thinking, wow, I really would like to bring this to my colleagues as a book club, I'm going to propose that you do so just as the way the book is designed, in that collaborative talk fashion, if you will, Becky. So that was a little bit different of a decision with this book compared to the other ones. I just want it to be designed in a way where we pause, we reflect, we implement, and we come back together and we talk about it.
Yeah, and that's the process of learning and embedding those ideas. And it is, so that's how Learning Pioneers started. We started with just gathering. We went through each chapter in Powering Up Children, the book I've written with Guy, one at a time. We talked about it. We discussed key ideas. We had some thinking routines. We chose one thing we were going to go off and do. And then we gathered again a few weeks later or like the next term and reflected on what we did, rinse and repeat. That's super powerful as a learning. And the ideas that came out were amazing. The things the teachers were doing were just so teachers are creative. We're creative beings. There were such creative ideas. So that kind of process I can vouch for, and it's super easy to set up. And maybe the school will put on breakfast for you or something like that.
Yeah, coffee, breakfast, and something yummy, something nourishing. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So there's lots of great comments in the chat here. So just a few things to confirm. Doha's saying the book supports building an inquisitive nature for students while also assessing their ability to ask quality questions. Would you say that was accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can add a third, it would be weaving those questions to the curriculum, right? Because that's our professional responsibility, isn't it? Having students learn about the curriculum from an inquiry sense, it's through the lens of exploration, discovery, and co-designing. And so the routines allow that to come into that beautiful mix as well.
Awesome. Yeah, good. So that was a good summary. And lots of people are saying they're going to buy the book straight away. So people going off and getting the book already. Great to see that.
Yay. Yay.
I would have mine in my hands, but it did come out today in the UK. So
did it? Yeah.
I've just cancelled my Amazon Prime. I'll have to start it again just to get the book quickly.
Just to get the book. It's happened. It's such a joy to see the book land in people's hands. So friends, if you do get a copy, send me a photo. I love to see it. I love to see where you're reading, what you're discovering, what you're learning is like. So a kind Trevor request is to send me a message or post something just so I can see where it is and when you've gotten it and how it's coming along.
And then you learn, right? Because people will come up with new ideas and new ways of adapting things. And then it's this virtuous cycle where everyone's sharing ideas and thinking, and your learning is expanding as well.
Yeah. There'll be something on my website soon where teachers are invited to, of course, implement the routines and then submit some photos and share a little reflection. And these vignettes have been so powerful. They've been powerful data collection, but there are these little powerful messages to teachers to learn from one another in terms of implementing these routines. So on my website, we're going to create a little space where we can keep that energy, that momentum, that kind of learning thread going as teachers engage in the book in and of itself. So I'm excited for that, Becky. In the coming weeks, that will be released as well.
Awesome. Well, we just had another question come in. Krista, this is amazing, kind of flipping between social media. She says someone on Instagram has asked for kindergarten, what specific routines encourage that age group into inquiry for 2 and 3 year olds? I've always seen your work as just transcending all age groups, which is incredible since you're in secondary,
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
What do you have to say for Krista's friend?
Yeah, thank you, Krista. What was fascinating is there's a colleague, Lydia Needham, in the UK. She's in London, Becky, and Lydia teaches reception. So little students, right? 4 years old, and they're not writing questions, are they? They're not crafting these rich, beautiful sentences and rich, beautiful questions yet. They're asking them. They're saying them, they're articulating these questions. Lydia's done this beautiful job of bringing a few routines together with these littles. She's taken the question continuum, she's taken something called the question timeline, and she's bringing several routines together. And then what she's done is she's spread them across several days. A routine that one teacher in grade 6, it may take them 30 minutes. Lydia's stretched them across several days of experiences and learning. Part of the several days allows Lydia to differentiate given the age of which she's supporting. Students are articulating their questions. Lydia's capturing those questions and turning them into images and questions that she'll print out. And then students can see these images and their language acquisition is actually improving across the days. So, in short, something to consider is how we can bring several routines together. Something I was very mindful with this book is showing a myriad of examples with the vignettes across different contexts. So grade levels, years, subject levels, and also the types of learners we're working with. Different settings, different subject areas, curricular standards. So I really love that question. These routines are not designed for the bigs. They're not designed for the littles. They're designed for everyone, adults included. And then something to consider a really playful approach is to weave routines together to best support your students given their question competence, given your subject area, and the grade level that you teach, Becky.
Yeah, great answer. And it's just about, it's about thinking creatively as a practitioner, isn't it? I love that Ron Richard quote, which is something about, if we want to change the story for education, we need to shift from yeah, but to what if. So every single idea, yeah, but that won't work for my age group, or yeah, but flipping it to what if I can find a way to adapt this for the children that I'm with. Really great question, great quote from Ron. And we've got Graham here, which is so exciting. Hello, Graham. And he's asked a really good question. He says, if having a book club in school, do you think you could start with this book if colleagues weren't too familiar with inquiry? Or which book would you start with first?
That's a great question, Graham. I would start with this book because there's actually a chapter, Graham, on provocation. And as we know, provocation is the practice of designing learning to spark curiosity. It's the notion of teachers reflecting on their curricular standards and trying to design an experience, an invitation to learning, trying to design artifacts as entry points to the curriculum where the intention is to get our students curious about their curriculum. There's a whole chapter on provocation alone. And as we know, provocation is a critical tool in the toolkit. Without provocation, we're just hoping our students are going to come in magically curious about everything that we're learning about. Provocation allows us to explore the curriculum through the vein of curiosity. So that's a pretty significant inquiry move, series of moves, series of skills. There's a chapter on that. There's a chapter, of course, on question misconceptions, which I have to be honest, Graham, I felt a little bit uncertain writing. It was the only chapter I sent out to critical friends and said, oh my gosh, is it okay that I say this? Is it okay that I've written this? And I was worried that I was going to offend teachers in sharing some of the misconceptions I hear out there. I was worried I was going to push teachers away and have them feel like, oh, I think that too, or Trevor, you're telling me I've had it wrong. And so I've really crafted the question routine, the whole book in a safe way, but in particular, the question misconceptions chapter for us to reflect on safely. Hey, did I think that too? Is that a reality in my context? And having us grapple with some of those feelings. And then the routines are just such a beautiful way to bring curriculum and curiosity together. I haven't written about it in my work. So in terms of looking at my publications and where to start with teachers who are new to inquiry, I would say this book, not just because it's brand new, Graham, but because it's that bridging. And I'd love to hear how it goes. If anyone starts their inquiry journey with this book, I'd love to hear feedback. Graham, that's my kind invitation to you, but any teacher out there who's at a school where perhaps inquiry is newer in terms of the talk, the communication, the landscape of learning at the school, I'd love to hear if this is the first go at inquiry in terms of a book club. I'd love to hear how it goes, Becky, and any feedback, any thoughts, what they noticed, how it went, and what advice they have to others who could learn from them.
Yeah, that was such a good question, because actually earlier on, when you were sharing about the book possibly being a bridge to more open-ended inquiry, I was thinking with my English curriculum hat on, and so many schools here are really interested in inquiry, but just don't quite know how to get there. But questioning and curiosity happen in every single classroom. We can all get better at that, so it's actually a bridge towards more of an inquiry approach. And if I relate it to the learning power approach, which is kind of part of my passion in teaching, curiosity and questioning are two of the learning muscles, so you're exercising two of those habits of mind that make you a ever more adept lifelong learner. And your book gives answers about how to go about that, so you could do that in any classroom. So it actually, I hadn't framed it in that way that Graham's asking, that actually it could be a bridge. It's an into more of an inquiry focus without it being threatening. I think people can get scared because they suddenly think, oh my goodness, we've got to let everything go. But it could be a journey, and your book can help.
Can I show a photo? I'm going to go maximum here just because you've really got me thinking, Becky. So I'm going to show a photo of a colleague's classroom. This is Sarah. There we go. Sarah Scott. She's in Scone, New South Wales, Australia. There we go. Now we're cooking. I've had to align this. And so this is called the question pencil routine, friends. You're getting a little bit of a crash course here. But what I wanted you to see are the acorn magnets above the pencil itself. And I'll go close, and you can see if I hold still what's written on some of them. You can see there's an imagining acorn, there's a questioning acorn. And of course, Becky, what this school has adopted is the learning power approach. And this school, each classroom has a class set of magnets, right? A class set of magnets that identifies these skills, these learning muscles. And at the start of the year, you know what the moves are that teachers make? The teacher writes maybe the agenda on the board and then places the magnets inside the agenda so the students can see the type of learning, the type of thinking, the type of muscles that they're going to flex across the agenda. So at the start of the year, the teacher is just bringing more awareness to the how of the learning adjacent to the what of the learning. And then slowly throughout the year, the teacher invites students to start moving those magnets around. Like maybe the teacher leaves the agenda blank and then engages in a lesson. Learning happens, and then she says, okay, kids, let's look at these magnets. What happened today? What was the learning? What were the muscles we flexed? I want you to turn and what muscle did you flex today? Okay, who has something to say about questioning? Who has something to say about imagining? Okay, let's bring these magnets and put them up here on the agenda now. So students are really thinking about their thinking and learning about their learning. At this point in the year, and Sarah using the question pencil, she actually challenged students to take the magnets and move them above the routine to identify and justify the how of the learning muscles that were occurring. You know, in terms of Sarah's work in adopting these question routines, that's a pretty fantastic photo. I love that photo, the story of that learning. But the beautiful thing is Sarah's not the only one at her school. There are other colleagues who have magnets as well. They're using them in similar ways. Think about the students knowing themselves as learners and knowing those skills, those muscles that they're flexing in order to take on more agency over learning. I bet you what's going to happen, Becky, is we're going to have dozens of teachers watching this live who are going to ask their principals, hey, order me a set of magnets. And honestly, I think it's a really affordable, inexpensive, yet powerful move to bring more awareness and discourse to the thinking, to the learning that's happening.
I'm so happy you shared that routine because that was my favorite one.
Yay.
But this is a really good comment as well. See, all the good questions are coming. We said, let's see if like about an hour and a half might be right. And in this kind of last half hour, all the great questions have been kind of coming out. So Pilar's saying, our teachers are at different points of their inquiry-based learning understanding, and this would be a great bridge to help them bridge that gap. What would you suggest to secondary teachers to get them excited about this? That's such a great question. So how to get them how to get the agency, the excitement around reading the books, because I guess Pilar can already see this is going to be brilliant, but how to connect with teachers' emotions so they feel like it will be brilliant too. What ideas have you got around that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Pilar. Thank you. Well, as a secondary teacher myself, something I've always struggled with is how siloed my curriculum is, right? Like as an English teacher, you know, I've got these really kind of tight standards, and I can only imagine what it's like for a science colleague or a math colleague or a history colleague. It's really always been challenging for me to see the transfer and to see the conceptual transfer into other subject areas. And these routines are a vehicle for that, for us to see how the curriculum doesn't necessarily need to be siloed, although it is. The routines allow students to find those connections and bring those connections into a space that I don't get to visit. I don't get to walk their footsteps into their math class every day, their history class, their French class, their science class. They do. The routines allow them to bring that transfer into the silo that I'm forced to teach into. So that's deeply exciting for secondary teachers. The relinquishing of a responsibility that I've got to figure out all that messiness and those connections. It's the students who are going to be finding that transfer and finding those connections. Another piece, Bila, is a lot of my schools engage in these really beautiful school-wide inquiries. You know, for IB teachers, IB colleagues in the PYP, this is that exhibition experience, isn't it? Or in the DP, it's that independent essay, isn't it? Where students get to kind of grapple with a passion, an interest, a problem statement, and they're given a bunch of agency and support to try to figure it out, to research and interview and share their learning to a public audience and create something that hopefully they care about, that they find meaningful. What we found with these routines at the secondary level is the routines allow teachers to better support students in those agency richest experiences of their high school kind of growth. For example, with their independent essay, all teachers at particular schools that I've worked with that have adopted the routines have adopted a routine called the question pyramid. And the question pyramid allows teachers to take their open-ended question, find their closed-ended questions that are going to support their exploration of the open-ended question, and it allows teachers who aren't the content expert in the focus of our students' independent essay to help students facilitate and plan and look for holes in their research, look for holes in their thinking. There's a beautiful marrying there of the teacher not having to know everything, the teacher not having to make all those connections for the student. It puts the student in the driver's seat and allows the teacher to use the routine as formative assessment to guide and shape next steps. Those are a few things that I get excited about, Pila, is breaking down the silo or helping me live inside that silo a little bit more beautifully, a little bit more comfortably, and then putting the students in the driver's seat when they have these really agency-rich experience. Again, we've talked a lot about the physical aspect of question routines, getting students out of desks, out of their seats, and into a physical space where they're moving. You know, I see more rows of desks in high schools than I do in elementary schools. I see more pods in elementary schools, more rows in high schools. Guess what we have to do to create space for question routines? We got to push those desks aside and get to a physical space. We've got to get out of those rows and into a space where we can collaborate and bump elbows and have discourse about the questions. And when I say we, I mean us and our students. So when I think of high school colleagues, the routines are actually going to be accelerating some of the things that perhaps we felt confined in for a number of years, a number of decades, for a number of reasons. But the routines should accelerate greater change over time, if you will, Becky.
Yeah, great answer. And it's a really great question because I think nearly every single school asks that question. That comes up all the time in our masterminds in Learning Pioneers. How do we walk with our teams? And how do we walk with them in a way that they feel the agency and it's coming from them and they're driving it when we already kind of know this thing's going to be brilliant? You know, so a couple of other things that can work with that are things like teacher surveys, well-crafted surveys to find out, you know, where they want to go next with their teaching and learning and what do they feel would help their practice, what would help their students. So getting them to articulate the why, and then you're bound to pick out from that perhaps more independence from the students or students being more excited about learning. And you can use those answers to say, hey, here's a way we can do that. And then you've listened to them and they've walked that journey. So that's another way of coming at it. We always
another
say,
thing. Oh, sorry, forgive me.
No, you go, Trevor.
I was just gonna share ever so briefly. Another thing that we've done with schools, high schools specifically, is we've given teachers choice over which routine they feel is best kind of aligned in their context. And then we've just kind of watched to what they gravitate to. And we've looked at the data and there's no rhyme or reason, right? There's not like there's a routine for a science teacher, or there's a routine for a math teacher. But by giving teachers choice, they find something that they want to grapple with, they want to implement. And so that choice, as we've come back to repeatedly throughout the live, that choice is so helpful for teachers. So again, there's not a routine specifically for a subject area or for a context in high school, but given choice to high school teachers allows them to find that really safe entry point or relevant, meaningful first step that they're going to take into implementing these routines into their context, Becky.
Yeah, and it's getting that why, you know, like Simon Sinek's TED Talk, starting with why. We always talk about starting with why, but then we say continuing with why and ending with why, because sometimes when you get that initial excitement and then you think, oh, we've got this, everyone's on board, we're going to go for it. If you don't circle back to it and remind ourselves why we're grappling with perhaps things that are going to go wrong in our classrooms, or we're going to have to pivot, and what we want the outcome to be, then it can flop. You know, so you kind of want to keep that why front and center.
I often say that the why is our North Star and it's our start point. And we're always going to circle back to and reflect on and talk about, gosh, leaders, like they say, Trevor, I say it 1,000 times a week, and I say it 1,001. You have to say it one more time. You have to commit and be steadfast in the why. You have to because the why grounds us. It tethers us. When the going gets tough and the murkiness of the profession, becomes turbulent and unclear, and we can't see the way. The why is what tethers us and anchors us in moving forward in this work. So the North Star and the start point.
Yeah, love that. So we've got more brilliant questions. so,
Yay.
Deepika says, and this I'm really glad that you've asked this, because I wanted to clarify it too from the posts that we'd put out again leading up to this. She says she wants to use these routines with early years, but is it questions from the teacher or is it questions from the students? And we had some really good input and points around questions and questioning, and student questions and teacher questions. So which does it lean into more, or is it both and?
It's both and I'm looking for a quick photo from the book. Gosh, you would hope that I know the book inside and out, but I can't seem to find the photo quick enough. But it is a both and. Number one really beautiful move teachers make is they craft some questions as well. As students are generating questions from provocation, and we're getting ready to call them up and place their questions in the routine, teachers have crafted a few questions of their own. And gosh, what a beautiful moment it is where a teacher pauses and does that modeling, right? And the teacher reads their question to the group and says, kids, where do you think I should place this? Can anyone, can you do the thinking right now? Where would this go? Think about my question. Okay, do you think it should come over here? Do you think it should come over here? Hotter, colder? So sharing and articulating the thinking underneath the teacher generated question. That's a move we want to make. But also sometimes there needs to be a non-negotiable question asked. You could just see in the formative data of their questions that, if I place this question on, there's going to be a tipping point. So that's a move you can make. I think another really authentic move to make is to spiral back to provocation, right? And so, in fact, Sarah's photo that I showed you, there's a precursor photo to the photo we looked at, which was Sarah saw that there were a lot of sticky notes, a lot of questions that really were following under one category of the question pencil. And rather than say, oh, my students, they didn't ask a variety of questions, they're not capable, she said, let's go back to a provocation. Let's go back to a few provocations and see if I can generate more questions from my students with my students, and then see what the data tells us. So there are a few moves that we make there with regards to the questions we ask. We can use them to model and kind of create some bumpers, right? Some goalposts for our students as they place their questions. We can actually put a non-negotiable question. If we see that they're formative, their evidence, their questions, this question needs to be asked. The ideal circumstance is, can I create the conditions for that question to come from my scholars? Can it come from a provocation right now? Or do I know that maybe later, as we spiral back through questions as learning occurs, maybe that non-negotiable question will actually surface in the coming days and weeks. So it is a both and, Becky, but what I wanted to do was share some of those pivotal moves we can make so teachers feel in the moment, this is something I could do, or this is something I could bridge in, or let's wind this back and go back to a provocation and see what happens when, if you will.
Yeah, that's a really great example of how dynamic you can be and need to be when developing new ideas and protocols. Because like we were saying before, it's very unlikely it's just going to map out exactly how you want. And I would share that openly with students. I would say, we're trying something new today, work with me, let's see how we go. And I would use it as a review at the end. Did that help us think? Did we get some great questions from that? So they're involved in that feedback and process of the new ideas being developed as well.
Absolutely.
So there's one more question in here that I'm going to suggest we keep really short. So I think it was Krista's. She said, yes, what's another routine that would go alongside the inverted triangle that you would suggest to kickstart the year and would help students grow in questioning and curiosity? So I'm going to suggest you just keep that really short and sweet, and then that's home learning. And we could go and look it up in the book.
Love it. Love it. So the first routine I introduce in the book is the question continuum. This is classic. This is an easy one. We've got close-ended questions on the board on an anchor chart over here. We've got open-ended questions over here, the indicators for open-ended questions. And then we draw a long line connecting the two ends of our whiteboard onto either anchor chart. And then we're just going to have students come and justify in place. They're going to put their questions along that continuum. And where they place their question on that continuum says something about just how open or closed their question is. If this question is aside this question, well, we're saying this one is slightly more closed than this one. Conversely, if we flip them, that says something about how open and closed the questions are. You can see there's a lot of gradient in the continuum. Where we place them really, really matters. That's a great lead into the triangle, where we take away some of that gradient and put it into the 3 bands. Another nice piece of the continuum is it gets kids out of their seats right away. It gets them up, active to the board. And for some settings, students aren't used to that move, that they're going to feel like, oh my God, I got to get out of my seat. He's making me stand, like heaven forbid. But the continuum is a nice, safe way for us to begin to engage in routines, not just in terms of the gradient, but also in terms of some of the feelings that we've referenced throughout the live, Becky. It gets kids used to taking certain steps in their thinking and the physical aspect of routines as well, in really safe ways.
That's another reason for doing it as a team as well, isn't it? Because when something goes wrong or not to plan and you have a wobble, you can share that with someone else who will also have had a wobble in a different way, and you can kind of all wobble together. So that makes it more supportive. It's not just suddenly like I'm stuck now. Or that's the reason for doing a book study online as well. You've got community to support you through those grapples.
And that was the intent with the vignettes, Becky. Every vignette has a colleague who's written about it. Here's my colleague, Tracy. Do you see Tracy there? Hi, Tracy. She's in Lincoln Fundamental Elementary School in Corona, California. And the intent, so every vignette, you see a little snapshot of the colleague. And the intent was to create a little bit of that safe space to wobble together. If you buy this book and you're in complete isolation at your school, and this is something where you feel like you're swimming upstream, in reading the book, you're going to see these teachers. You're going to see how they implemented them. You're going to feel less alone in reading the book in isolation at a setting in a school like that. And you can see the little gradient along the spine there, Becky? Yeah. So the gradient is built into the design. So you can easily go to a gradiated area and look and say, oh, that's the question triangle, or you can quickly find the question pencil. So the design of the book is meant to make it easy to read, easy to implement, and of course, that you're not doing it alone. You're working with a community of learners globally that you never met. Isn't that beautiful?
Love that. Should we start to wrap things up, Trevor?
We should. We should.
Lot. Have you got any Becky, final things you'd like to share?
I'm going to put you on the spot because you've been so kind and generous, and you're always such a gracious host. And I've worked with you a number of times in a number of places. And I just want you to tell a little bit about the links that have been thrown in the chat, a little bit about Learning Pioneers, and just for people to circle back, inspire back, and finding you, that maybe in my communities here on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram, maybe they were unfamiliar with your work previously. Can you share a little bit more about how to find you?
Yes, that's very generous, Trevor. Thank you. So Learning Pioneers, I think we've interviewed you, Trevor, 3 times, with Jessica Vance on Curiosity, on Agency, and with Ron Berger on Craftsmanship. So we're really aligned in inquiry-led thinking and learning to learn. I said at the beginning, we talk about what matters in education, and that's up for debate, but curiosity and questioning and everything you're doing, Trevor, matters. So we interview incredible speakers like Trevor, but then we work out how to put those ideas into practice over time. So we collaborate, we have campfires together, we have book studies, we have all sorts. So Kim's just sharing in the chat the Learning Pioneers website, and she's also going to share a special Trevor McKenzie, Friends of Trevor McKenzie link, where you can join our asynchronous content. You get a month for free because you're friends of Trevor, and you can just check out what we've got and just enjoy exploring for a month. And then we'd love you to stay, but if you get a lot from that month, that's absolutely amazing and fine too. And then my other learning community is Press Play, and Kim is my co-host in Press Play. And that's about taking play all the way through primary. And we interviewed Trevor in there too. We looked at making longer term inquiry projects and the links between inquiry and play. So Thanks, Trevor. That's Press Play and Learning Pioneers.
Thank you. And friends, Becky, I've never come across a community of professional learning such as you facilitate and you invite colleagues to. So friends, if you're interested, please find Becky's spaces and have a look. And I'm so thrilled that you're giving them a gift of some Trevor content from our time together. I think that's really exciting. So thank you for that.
A pleasure. And there's one more thing I want to do before we log off. Because when we spoke last week and you said, I think the book's going to be available on the actual day. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's the actual book launch. What shall I do? And so, as any good primary teacher would do, I rummaged in my cupboards to see what I could do to celebrate. So I have a little thing to celebrate. I'm going to ask everyone in the chat to celebrate with me. So not right now, in a second, when I count down from 3, you can write in the chat something that's influenced you from Trevor's work, something you appreciate, or just a congratulations for this fantastic book, which is going to make a huge difference to educators across the world. And whilst people do that, I've got these.
No. Oh my gosh. Amazing.
3. One of them was yellow.
That is adorable. I love it. I love it. You have those in your drawers at home? Gosh,
yeah,
I want to visit your house.
I'm a primary teacher.
Those are fantastic.
I thought we'd go analog. I'm sure we could do that online, but I was like, I got to pull them.
That's much more fun, much more playful. Becky, thank you so much. That was amazing, kind of you.
And you're getting lots of thanks in the chat there.
Yay. So what's next, Becky? For me, I'm off to Australia tomorrow. Suitcase not yet packed, but bringing this book to Australia, my friends. So I know many of you, well, I don't know, I haven't had a chance to look at the chat, but I'm visiting a lot of schools across Australia for the rest of the month. And that's really my primary focus, is supporting colleagues in Oz and really helping this book get wings and getting it out there to teachers and schools around the world. So friends, if you can help me help this book get wings, whatever that means to you all, that would be greatly appreciated. And gosh, an hour and a half just flies by. Becky, this was my first StreamYard experience, going live to all these different spaces. And yeah, really grateful for you being playful and coming in and facilitating this alongside me. So my deep thanks, okay? And Kim as well, backstage Kim. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Trevor. And thanks, everyone. Brilliant questions and comments in the chat. It's been great to learn with you and share that thinking.
Great. Happy Monday, wherever you are, friends. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. Hope you're well. Bye for now.
Bye.